Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining me. Today we're going to be talking about production's possibilities curves, and also known as production possibilities frontiers. So a little bit of backstory here. They changed the name from production possibilities curves to production possibilities frontiers because sometimes they don't actually form a curve. So when we're discussing production possibilities curves, right, or PPCs or PPFs, however you want to call it, well, what are production possibilities curves in any case? Well, they're really an economic model that's used to explain opportunity cost and trade-offs to us. So it's because of these models, right, that helps us further understand how we make choices, right, and what we have to give up when we do make choices, right? So in that, they're very useful, right? They're more conceptual than actually used in practice, but we're going to explore them nonetheless so that we can understand how we can make trade-offs. So first thing that we need to be made aware of is the assumptions, okay? So we're always dealing with certain assumptions in any time we use information. We're operating under assumptions, right? So if you're studying science, right, you're assuming that the Earth is revolving around the sun, right? So that sort of thing. So there are certain assumptions that you make in order to understand the information and process it. So when we talk about production possibilities curves, there's assumptions that need to be made. All right? So first of all, resources are fixed. There's no variation in the resources. They're fixed. You're not going to get any more or any less. Right? I know this seems a little obscure right now, but you hopefully will understand these assumptions as we go forth in the model. So the resources are fixed. There's no wasted resources, right? Now I know if you guys are anything like me, there's wasted resources at some point. You either waste time, or if you're cooking a meal, maybe you chop the end off of a tomato or something and you don't use every single little bit that you can, right? That would be the wasted resources. But in our production possibilities curves, we're not wasting any resources here, right? It's because this is more of a thought experiment than it is in practice. All right, so this is the best case scenario for us. All right, another assumption we make is only two things can be produced. Obviously, there's factories and farms and things in the world where you produce many things, right? The reason that there's only two things that can be produced is because this is, again, illustrating opportunity costs and trade-offs. So you're trading really one thing for another, right? So we're operating under the assumption that there's only two things that we're producing. All right, and then the last assumption that we're making is technology is fixed. The reason for this is because technology always increases the supply of things. So whenever we have improvements in technologies, that's going to lead to more readily available resources, right? Or even faster production so that we can produce more. You see this with all sorts of stuff, especially things like TVs, right? We can produce TVs and cars and things like that much faster because of technology. So just keep in mind that these assumptions when we're talking about this. All right, so what we do when we take a production possibilities curve is we're assuming that we have, let's say a factory, right? Let's say you own a factory. Now let's say you want to produce snowboards in your snowboard factory. All right, so what we're looking at here is going to be a graph. This is going to be the upper right-hand quadrant, right? So everything here is going to be in the positives, right? So as we go up on the y-axis here, we're going to go increasing in our supply, and as we go up on the x-axis, we're going to be increasing in our supply on this side. All right, so there's no negatives in this because we're dealing with actual production resources. All right, so what we do is we're going to take this chart here, right? We have snowboards and skis, right? And then the different combinations. All right, and what we're doing is we're basically plugging this information into here. All right, so I'm going to explain that a little bit first. So let's say you have your snowboard factory, right? And let's say you have a set amount of resources, right? A set amount of wood, a set amount of paint, a set amount of employees. Those resources are fixed. And you're optimizing your production, and you're making as many snowboards as you can. Well, let's assume that you make 50,000, you can make 50,000 snowboards a year. Let's just assume that. 50,000 snowboards a year, just churning away day and night, and you got all your resources, nothing's wasted, technology's fixed, and you're only producing snowboards. But theoretically, if you can produce snowboards in your snowboard factory, you can also produce what? Skis. Well, why is that? Well, because they require the same resources to produce, right? You need the wood, you need the paint, you need the straps where you put your feet in. So all of these, right, snowboards that you can make, you could also make skis. But think about this. If you were only to produce one thing, be it snowboards or skis, which would you be able to produce more of? Well, the answer would be skis, right? Probably, because each individual ski is going to use less resources than each individual snowboard, right? So keep that in mind, right? So let's say you're going to produce a combination of X amount of snowboards and X amount of skis. Well, how do you determine what to produce? Well, that's a little bit more complicated, right? You can be, how much does it cost you to produce one, right? You can think of factors such as the demand out there. Are people willing to pay more for snowboards or for skis? There's many different ways you can think about it. But before you decide what you're going to produce, what you should do is run through a production possibilities curve, right? So we can determine what would be better for us. So let's say we've run the numbers and we can either produce 50,000 snowboards and 0 skis, or we could produce 40,000 snowboards and 20,000 skis, or we can produce 25,000 snowboards, 40,000 skis, or we can produce no snowboards at all and 60,000 skis. All right, so let's go ahead and plot this. I've color-coded this so that it's easier for us to see and understand. All right, so let's look at the first combination at point A, right? So we have 50,000 snowboards and 0 skis. All right, so we're going to go ahead and check this out. So 50,000 would be around here, and for snowboards, right? And then the skis would be 0. So we'd have a point somewhere around here, and this would be point A. Okay, now let's plot another point, 40,000 snowboards and 20,000 skis. So this would be 40,000 and maybe something like here, right? This would be point B. Well, then let's look at point C, 25,000 snowboards and 40,000 skis. So we'll look at a point maybe right around here. Hopefully this is not new to you and you're somewhat familiar with plotting points on a graph. All right, and then point D, where we max out our skis at 60,000 and we have 0 snowboards. So this would be point D. Well, now what do we do? So we have these various points and really anything in between. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to connect the dots here. Right? And this line or this curve or this frontier is going to be called our production possibilities curve or production possibilities frontier. All right, we'll use that interchangeably. All right, now keep in mind, let's go back and look at our assumptions. So we're assuming that resources are fixed. We're not going to purchase more wood or purchase more plastic or upgrade anything during this time that we're producing these things. All right, we're also not going to waste any resources. Now, is it possible in actual production that, oops, somebody makes a mistake and cuts something wrong and you have to throw it out, and we would end up with 49,999 snowboards? Yes, that's very true, right? That happens all the time. However, for this thought experiment in understanding the trade-offs, we're going to assume there's no wasted resources. All right, so also we're assuming that only two things can be produced, snowboards and skis. Theoretically, you could produce snowboards, skis, and skateboards, right? But again, that's not the purpose of the production possibilities curve, right? This is only for a thought experiment and trying to determine what our trade-off is. Now then, the next assumption, technology is fixed, right? And anybody who is producing things for a while, right? It really started with people like Henry Ford and the assembly line and revolutionizing to be able to produce more cars. And what did that do? That was that enabled the Ford Motor Company to be able to sell cars very cheaply, so that the average person can buy them, right? So technology, let's assume that technology is fixed for this example. All right, so well, why do we even have this curve? Why does that even matter? The reason it matters is because at any point in time, we can produce this amount, right? We can produce this amount. Let's say we produce 30,000 snowboards and 28,000 skis, right? And why this is useful is you could see what the demand is for different snowboards or skis, or let's say if you're doing this several years, you have the Winter Olympics becomes popular, and who's that guy, Shaun White, the snowboarder, right? So snowboarding is more popular, so you might want to shift from maybe point C to point B, right, to get in more in that snowboarding market. So this has a number of uses, right? But before we go, I want to help you guys understand this a little bit more, right? So this would be called, this line, right, this production possibilities curve, all right, all the way through, this will be called efficient. All right, efficient production. Anything on the line is going to be using your resources efficiently, right? No wasted resources. Okay, well, what if you only produce 30,000 snowboards and 10,000 skis? What about this point? Let's label it E. Well, why would you do that? All right, that would be not maximizing your resources. You would probably be wasting resources. This will be called inefficient, right? Because it's not efficient, right? You're not efficiently using your resources. You're being inefficient with your resources, and you're leaving money on the table. All right, I'm going to show you one more point here. Let's say this point right here. Could we do that? Could we make 50,000 or 45,000 snowboards and 30,000 skis? Let's label this point F, right? No, this is not possible given our fixed resources here and our fixed technology. So this will be called production impossibility. All right, so again, we're going to deal with more of this kind of stuff, the production impossibilities. We'll save this more elaboration for our next video, but let's say you increase the technology or you increase resources. You buy more wood, you make more hiring decisions, and you get more staff to produce these things. Well, then we have what was called a shift. Okay, let's say we shifted to this amount. All right, so then what was previously an impossibility would now be considered inefficient or underutilizing your resources. All right, so we'll talk more about shifts in a later video, but right now, hopefully you understand the way that we convert this from the chart to the graph, okay, and the assumptions that we make with production possibilities curves, and how this kind of shows us the trade-off. So if I were to ask you, well, what is the trade-off in moving from 50,000 snowboards to 40,000 snowboards? Then the trade-off would be you'd be gaining 20,000 skis. So again, we're going to talk more about how to use the language in discussing these things in trade-offs and opportunity costs, as well as shifts in the production possibilities curves. All right, thank you for joining me, and hope you learned something.